is under its temporary military control, it also declined the UN request to access these areas. We commend the UN humanitarian activities in the Ukraine-controlled part of the Kherson region and support the UN in seeking the necessary access to the areas temporarily occupied by Russia. To this end, the government of Ukraine has promptly provided all security guarantees to the UN for fulfilling humanitarian operations in the entire affected area. We echo the call by the UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, on the Russian authorities to act in accordance with their obligations under the international humanitarian law and grant access to people in the occupied territory who urgently need life-saving assistance. The situation there remains critical, and the number of people reported missing so far, 109 people, may not fully reflect the grim reality. While in the occupied areas Russia simply denies access, it also tries to undermine the humanitarian operations in Ukraine-controlled areas with unbated shelling. For instance, on June 20th, a rescue team of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine came under Russian fire in Kherson. One rescuer was killed and 8 others were wounded. As stated by UN Ukraine in relation to this incident, it was yet another example of the human impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A comprehensive assessment of the implications of this act of terror is yet to be made, although it is clear that we are dealing with one of the biggest man-made disasters in Europe for decades. In particular, oil pollutants that weigh at least 150 tons are drifting along the Dnipro River and may reach the Mediterranean. The Kakhovka reservoir is decimated with about 95,000 tons of dead fish. 500 square kilometers of Ukrainian forests have been flooded, and at least half of them will die. 20,000 wild animals that inhabited the flooded area could hardly survive. Distinguished colleagues, it is a matter of alarm that, according to intelligence information, Russia is considering a scenario of a terrorist attack at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant with radiation leakage. The dam explosion has made it clear that Russia is ready to apply a scorched earth tactic in response to the deteriorating military situation on the ground in the captured lands they doubt they can hold. We therefore urge the international community to take the threat of this act of nuclear terror seriously and to step up pressure on the Russian Federation to prevent these menacing developments, including, but not limited, to introducing strengthened restrictive measures against the Russian nuclear industry and military-industrial complex. We also expect an objective assessment by IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi regarding Russia's criminal actions. Only strong and adequate steps aimed at reducing Moscow's capabilities to inflict harm regionally and globally will contribute to resolving the crisis created by Russia. The military defeat of Russia in Ukraine and ensuring accountability for the crime of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity are the necessary elements of this resolution. Appeasement options, such as territorial concessions to Russia and temporary freezing of the conflict, will only serve as delayed action mines with the detonator in the hands of the Kremlin. If such an option is implemented, the resulting explosion, given the damage to the principles of the UN Charter, will reverberate throughout the world. Any terrorist act aims at intimidating and generating fear. This is precisely how the Kremlin regime attempts to achieve its aggressive goals. Russia has heavily fortified the occupied Ukrainian territory, but it does not believe in these fortification structures or its own troops. Blew up the dam and mined Zaporizhzhia NPP to intimidate the international community. That is why it fills its own army with convicted criminals and deploys blocking units behind the Russian positions, tasking them to give soldiers in the first line of defense no escape from combat. The killing of those Russian soldiers attempting to retreat are evidenced by the testimonies of captured Russians, as well as video footage captured recently by Ukrainian drones. Despite the occupied areas having been heavily fortified, in some areas Ukrainian soldiers continue to move forward. In some areas they defend their positions and resist Russia's intensified attacks. Ukraine will liberate all its territories, and it will take as long as necessary, because we value the lives of our soldiers and civilians and do not apply the strategy of human wave attacks and total destruction of civilian infrastructure. Madam President, we appreciate the efforts of those nations who express their willingness to contribute to genuine peace, which will testify to the persistent validity and credibility of the UN Charter. The UN General Assembly has outlined the modalities of such peace in its resolution Principles of the UN Charter, underlying a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. Russia so far demonstrates no willingness to give up its aggressive path, deliberately insulting those nations who come up with peaceful initiatives. Russian cruise and ballistic missiles launched on Kiev during the visit of the delegation of African leaders showed Russia's real disdain for global efforts to restore peace and to protect the world from aggression. This attack was only one in an endless line of day-to-day airstrikes with missiles, MLRS, guided aerial bombs, and Iran-made attack drones, resulting in significant casualties and destruction. In particular, as of today, more than 1,000 launches by the Russian Federation of the Iranian UAVs over the territory of Ukraine have been recorded. In today's statement that was delivered at the media stakeout right before the Security Council's meeting, we said that Russia's and Iran's actions violate UN Security Council Resolution 2231. The Secretariat of the United Nations must respond to growing calls from the international community to investigate these violations. Madam President, despite the war being at its height, we have already started working on post-war recovery. The Ukraine Recovery Conference held this week in London sent a strong political message that Ukraine and allies have no doubt in the ultimate victory of my country, a victory that will guarantee a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace to the benefit of all nations. As my president said when addressing the conference, although no one has the power to cleanse the depths of human nature from the evil that sometimes rises to the surface and destroys and kills, we are able to protect life and overcome the ruins after the Russian aggression in such a way that the path for evil, for any new aggression, will be blocked. The world is watching too if we will restore normal life in such a way that our transformation will inflict an ideological defeat on the aggressor. In his speech in Paris just yesterday, Secretary General Guterres said, I quote, "In 2023, more than 750 million people do not have enough to eat. The COVID-19 pandemic and Russian invasion of Ukraine have exacerbated the situation," end of quote. In fact, Russia is worse than the COVID-19. Putin's regime is cancer, and the world cannot be strong and healthy while its cells continue to spread from Putin's bunker and form the new tumors around the world. And in fact, in this very council, in this chamber, it should be removed before it travels further in your blood and kills you. The choice is yours, ladies and gentlemen. Choose life. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Madam President. I am delivering this statement on behalf of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and my own country, Lithuania. I thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing and the United Arab Emirates Presidency for the opportunity to address this Council. Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, aided by Belarus, is ongoing for almost a year and a half now. Innocent people have been killed, injured, and displaced from their homes. Families have been torn apart, and children have been orphaned. The physical and emotional scars of the war will be felt for generations to come. Schools, hospitals, and other public facilities have been destroyed, leaving people without the access to essential services. According to the World Bank's assessment, carried out in collaboration with the Ukrainian government, the European Commission, and the United Nations, the reconstruction needs for the damages caused by the Russian aggression against Ukraine are estimated to be around 411 billion over the next decade. This staggering amount highlights the severity of the damages caused by the Russian aggression and the need for significant investment to rebuild the country. The calculations conducted so far, however, do not incorporate the detrimental impact of the Kakhovka Dam destruction by Russia and its humanitarian, economic, and ecological consequences. Madam President, it is unacceptable that despite the repeated calls from the United Nations on the Russian Federation to provide safety guarantees for crossing the front line to the left bank of the Dnipro River and ensure humanitarian access to all civilians impacted by the destruction of the dam, such guarantees have not yet been provided. It is imperative that Russia takes immediate action in accordance with their obligations under international humanitarian law to allow United Nations to provide the much-needed humanitarian aid to those affected by this devastating act, including in Oleksy. The Baltic states are among the top bilateral aid donors to Ukraine as a percentage of our GDPs. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania already provided 1.5 million euros of immediate assistance to Ukraine to alleviate the consequences of Kakhovka Dam destruction, and this does not include private initiatives. The costs of addressing the repercussions of Russia's aggression against Ukraine as a sovereign nation are consistently increasing, while only 26% of the total 3.9 billion required for the humanitarian response in Ukraine has been funded up to the point. We urge the international community to persist in providing the necessary funding. The work of the UN and its agencies to ensure close monitoring and proper documentation of massive human rights abuses and violations of international humanitarian law should continue. We hope for an objective and accurate assessment of the situation due to Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine in the forthcoming annual reports of the Secretary General on conflict-related sexual violence and children in armed conflicts. Madam President, allow me to express Estonia's, Latvia's, and Lithuania's appreciation for the active UN engagement in alleviating the global consequences of Russia's aggression, including through the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Russia continues to hinder the exports of Ukrainian goods from the Ukrainian ports and thereby contributing to a significant increase in food prices on global markets. Russia also continues manipulating the facts and repeatedly threatens to end the Black Sea Grain Initiative if its demands are not met. In fact, according to available statistics, including of Russian origin, Russian exports of grain and fertilizers have been consistently high in recent years. In case of grains, they are even reached record levels. In 2022, due to higher prices, Russia's export revenues from fertilizers increased by impressive 70 to 150%, depending on the source. According to the FAO, the export volume of Russian fertilizers in 2022 has only decreased by 10%. Russia must stop blackmailing global community and allow the Black Sea Grain Initiative to operate at its maximum potential. Finally, Madam President, our countries continue to argue for the full Russia's political and military leadership accountability for the crime of aggression. The core group of the Special Tribunal for the Russian Crime of Aggression will hold its fourth meeting in Warsaw on the 29th and 30th of June, and we call on all other states and international organizations to join our collective efforts. We will continue to stand with Ukraine and its people for as long as it takes for Ukraine to rightfully defend itself against Russia's brutal war of aggression. The only path for the comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine is the one based on full respect of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Withdrawal of Russian troops is key precondition of that. We welcome all the efforts of our global partners in reaching peace in Ukraine that are in line with Ukraine's peace formula, the UN Charter, and the international law. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Madam President, members of the Security Council, Poland appreciates the convening of today's timely meeting and duly notes all the insightful remarks delivered by Madam Undersecretary Di Carlo and other distinguished speakers. Madam President, for close to 500 very long days and nights, Russia has been ruthlessly pursuing its brutal aggression against Ukraine. During that whole time, it has also cynically dismissed all the appeals for stopping the bloodshed and removing its troops from the Ukrainian territory, no matter how loud and clear they have been, or from which corner of the world they originated. Therefore, for the last couple of weeks, the international community has been closely following the efforts of the Ukrainian armed forces determined to liberate their country from the Russian illegal occupation. In this context, let me draw your attention to the following three issues. Firstly, Russia needs to bear the full cost of the destruction its aggression has caused. With Russia's continued attacks on Ukraine's critical and civilian infrastructure, taking full scope of the reconstruction process will be an especially crucial challenge. After 16 months, it is obvious that what Russia cannot take, it will try to destroy. Shattering the livelihood of thousands of innocent civilians by blowing up the Novakharkovka Dam is just one of the most recent examples of this cruel strategy. Therefore, Poland reiterates its full support for the creation of the comprehensive registry of all the damages inflicted by the Russian invasion, followed by a close coordination and transparency of the reconstruction efforts. In this respect, we commend the Ukraine Recovery Conference that took place in London over the last 2 days. Its aim was to prepare a political, legal, and financial base that would enable comprehensive assistance for reconstruction to be provided to Ukraine. And as such, it definitely fulfilled its goals. Secondly, Ukraine has a perfect right to freely choose their alliances and partnerships. It needs to be able to decide by itself which international partners it wants to build its future prosperity with. This naturally includes security cooperation. Kiev is looking forward to concrete prospects for ensuring its security after the Russian aggression is put out, and Poland fully understands and supports this approach. Last but not least, we must bear in mind that although the process of reconstruction of Ukraine will be costly and lengthy, it is in the interest of the whole world. According to some estimates, at least 600 million consumers worldwide directly depend on Ukraine's agricultural production. We firmly believe that only a complete and unconditional withdrawal of Russian forces from the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine can provide a chance for a just and stable peace, facilitating a long-term solution for global economic recovery and an improvement in the world food situation. Even if we manage to stop the bloodshed today, reinstate the primacy of international law, and establish peace, the consequences of this war will be felt for a very long time. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Poland for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Czechia.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Slovakia and my own country, Czechia. We fully align ourselves with the statement to be delivered by the European Union. Let me thank you for convening this important meeting, and of course I would like to thank Under-Secretary General Di Carlo for her briefing, which unfortunately only adds to the bleak picture of the devastating consequences of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine. We regret that the UN Security Council must devote its attention to this issue once again simply due to Russia's utter disregard for the UN Charter and its fundamental principles. Judging by its actions in Ukraine, Russia has demonstrated time and again that it has no interest in effective multilateralism, maintenance of international peace and security, and development of friendly relations. The Russian armed forces continue to deliberately target civilians and civilian infrastructure. We strongly condemn such barbaric attacks. Therefore, let us be under no illusion about the true intentions of the Russian government. Their attack on Kiev with missiles last week, while African leaders were in the city on a diplomatic mission, speaks for itself. Madam President, we ask ourselves how many lives must be lost or ruined for this senseless war to stop. For Russia, the death toll, which keeps rising from one Security Council briefing to another, is apparently just a number on the paper. Russia's disregard for international humanitarian law and human rights is also evident in its ongoing repression of its own citizens. We were also horrified by the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam and by the very disturbing reports that the Russian forces were shelling Ukrainian rescue workers who were trying to reach flooded areas in the Kherson region. We call on Russia once again to stop immediately its aggression against Ukraine and to withdraw its troops from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, including Crimea and regions where Russia orchestrated its sham referenda. We will also continue to support efforts to hold fully accountable those who committed the most serious crimes under international law in Ukraine, including rape and sexual violence against women and girls. As our foreign ministers agreed during their last bilateral meeting, we will maintain our comprehensive support for Ukraine in its just struggle to preserve its statehood. Czechia and Slovakia have stood by Ukraine since the start of its defense against Russia's aggression, and we will remain steadfast in supporting Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity until this nightmare ends. And we hope that day will come soon. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Czechia for their statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Olaf Skog, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Madam President, colleagues. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. The potential candidate Georgia, as well as Andorra and San Marino, all aligned themselves with this statement. First, I wanted to thank Under-Secretary General Di Carlo for a briefing, and I wanted to take this opportunity to commend the entire UN team on the ground, led by Resident Coordinator Denise Brown, for the invaluable assistance that you are providing to the people of Ukraine in these very difficult times. We know the UN system is fully mobilized through humanitarian relief, support to refugees and internally displaced persons, human rights monitoring, mine action, nuclear safety, addressing the dire global consequences of Russia's aggression, and much more besides, and you have our very strong support. Madam President, as Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression approaches the tragic mark of 500 days, the people of Ukraine and the international community desire a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter and the resolutions of the General Assembly. Yet one country, the aggressor, remains steadfast in pursuing its brutal war against the neighboring country and its people. When African heads of state visited Kiev last week calling for peace, Russia responded by bombing the city, as it did when the UN Secretary General visited last year. The way to end Russia's assault on Ukraine is crystal clear. Russia must stop its war and immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw all of its forces and proxies from the entire territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. I will emphasize briefly 3 points in my intervention. One, the dramatic human rights situation in the territories temporarily occupied by Russia. Two, the importance of upholding international humanitarian law. And three, the need for accountability. Madam President, the human rights situation in the occupied territories is of grave concern. International monitoring mechanisms, including the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, and the UN Commission of Inquiry have concluded that Russian authorities have committed a wide range of violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law in Ukraine. The reported violations include indiscriminate attack against civilians and civilian infrastructure, a widespread and systematic pattern of summary executions, torture and ill treatment and unlawful confinement, as well as inhumane detention conditions, rape and other forms of sexual and gender-based violence, and forced transfer and deportation, including of children. Many of these amount to war crimes. The last report of the Commission of Inquiry also concludes that the attacks of Ukraine's energy-related infrastructure and the use of torture by Russian authorities may amount to crimes against humanity. We call on Russia to uphold international human rights law. Its practice of forcibly issuing Russian passports to Ukrainian citizens is in blatant violation of international law, and it undermines Ukraine's sovereignty. The ICRC should be granted full and unconditional access to all detained persons, and all illegally detained Ukrainian citizens by Russia should be released. The decision by the Russian Central Election Commission to hold so-called elections in the temporarily military-occupied territories of Ukraine is yet another violation of international law, and by the way, the October GA resolution adopted by the United Nations on Ukraine's territorial integrity. Secondly, we reiterate the importance of upholding international humanitarian law. We are appalled by reports that evacuation teams rescuing civilians following the destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant dam are being shelled. We urge the Russian Federation to cease such attacks and allow help to the affected civilian population, including in areas under Russian military control. The EU condemns the attack at the Kakhovka HPP in the strongest possible terms. It is a direct consequence of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The downstream flooding has not only put tens of thousands of civilian lives in danger, but it's also affecting water and energy supplies and causing an ecological and environmental catastrophe. As repeatedly requested by the United Nations, we urge Russia to enable safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access to populations in need of assistance, in particular into the temporarily occupied territories. Aid cannot be denied to those in need. The impact of Russia's aggression on children is particularly horrific, and we look forward to the imminent publication of the Secretary General's report on children in armed conflict. Third, the EU is firmly committed to ensuring full accountability for war crimes and the other most serious crimes committed in connection with Russia's war of aggression. We emphasize the importance of coordinated accountability initiatives to combat impunity and ensure justice. We support the ongoing work for the establishment of a tribunal for the prosecution of the crime of aggression, which is of concern to the international community as a whole. The EU welcomes the establishment of the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression at Eurojust in The Hague. We're also fully supportive of the establishment of an international mechanism to register the damages Russia has inflicted, following the UN GA resolution of November 2022, which acknowledged the need for a register of damage, and the Reykjavik summit recently of the Council of Europe, the register now was established. We underlined our support for the investigations of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Madam President, the EU calls for a just, comprehensive and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter and the GA resolution adopted in February, and in respect of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. A peace that will benefit all nations, as the Ukraine ambassador just said. We welcome international efforts to this effect, and we reaffirm our support to President Zelensky's peace formula. Security Council members must distinguish between the victim and the aggressor in this war of aggression. Under the UN Charter, Ukraine has the right to self-defense against Russia's attacks in order to restore its territorial integrity. It also has the right to request international support for such efforts. The EU is committed to support Ukraine in this regard for as long as it takes. I thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Skog for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.